Hello and welcome to another tutorial from Revenge Motion Graphics, Reverse Engineering Motion Graphics. And today we're going to take a look at this scene, which is all done with stills. So this is done with a maybe 3 or 4 different stills. Mostly I got them from my stock photo site, and you can use similar stills to follow along as well. So let's get started here. So we're going to make a new composition, and I'm just going to do a 1280 by 720. Let's do maybe 20 seconds, and we'll just call this truck scene. Alright, and let's go ahead, and you can have your own settings, but here are mine, and I'll hit OK. So basically what I'm going to do is I'll start with a very simple truck image, and I found this again on a stock photo site that I subscribe to, and it is going to be this guy right here. So I'm going to bring in my truck, and I'm going to get rid of some of the other older compositions here, and I'll resize it down. So maybe something like this. I'm not concerned about the other parts of the image here. I'm just mostly concerned with seeing the full truck here. So maybe I'll make them a little bit larger. Okay, so this is my starting point, and what I'm going to do is divide this truck into basically 1, 2, 3, 4 planes, and I'll show you those more in detail as we move along here. So immediately what I'll do is I'm going to pre-comp some of these and name them correctly. Okay, so first thing I'll do is I will pre-compose this, so layer pre-compose, and let's go ahead and start with I'm going to choose the middle option here, and I'll start with naming this front truck. Okay, so this will be this part of the truck here. I'll hit OK. So what I will immediately after this point is I need to double click inside the pre-comp. And here what I'll do is I'm going to get rid of all this extraneous space that I don't need. And the easiest way that I found is just to simply click on the region of interest tool and drag out a section that I will basically cut out, including these these rear view windows here. So basically I'm going to drag out a box large enough so it encapsulates the front part of this truck, including these 2 windows here, or rather mirrors. And then I'll go to composition, crop comp to region of interest. Okay, so at this point I have a main composition here, and inside this main composition I have an embedded composition called front truck. What I'll do is I'm going to slightly change some of these distortions caused by the perspective here. Bring in some guides. I'll put one here, and I will put one on the other side of this plane here, this front plane. Okay, now it's not going to be a drastic difference here, but I do want it to undistort the perspective. So the way I'm going to do that basically is I'll go to my effects here, and I'll put in a corner pin effect onto this front truck composition here, and I will slightly kind of try to get rid of the perspective here. Again, it's going to be a very subtle thing, so I'll just slightly move some of these corners around. I'm trying to keep an eye on this line here. So maybe something like that. So maybe I'll make another guide here for the bottom, and one for the top just to help me out. So I'll drag this down kind of like this, trying to match this corner of the truck with this corner of the truck, and the same thing on top here. Maybe I'll match the top parts. Again, nothing too drastic here, but just a little bit of a way to get rid of the perspective. Maybe I'll even push some of this the other way. Okay, so perhaps like that. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll go into my front truck here, and again I will do a pre-comp. So pre-compose again, and let's just call this front truck. Let's just call it main or something. I'll do that, and now I have, if you look at this chain here, I have my front truck main. Inside of that is the front truck, which we basically use the corner pin on, and inside of that is the main layer where we basically cropped. So all of these planes will basically be 2 compositions deep. Okay, and at this point I can go ahead and start using masks, get rid of the stuff we don't need here. So first thing I'll do is I'll grab my mask tool and I'll get rid of this top section here, set it to subtract, and I will kind of continue doing that, the areas that I don't need. Now they won't be all rectangular masks. I'm going to have to use the pen tool on some of these, but a lot of them I can sort of get rid of a lot of parts that I don't need by using the rectangle tool. So maybe something like this, and I'll do one on this side and hit subtract. Then one more. So again, make sure your composition is selected and you do another subtract. Okay, now I am missing some areas. For example, there's some stuff here at the bottom I want to bring back. So what I could do is set these temporarily to none, and I can come in here and, for example, I can bring in some of these areas at the bottom here, or I can even bring in this rear view mirror here. So maybe I'll do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'll just grab my pen tool, and again I'll just draw out a mask that it doesn't have to be perfect, but at least it gets a pretty good outline of this rear view mirror here. And I will set that to I'll keep that an add, mainly because when I change these to subtract, okay, the one that is set to add, which is this one here, it kind of brings back the areas that I cropped out with the other 4 masks. Okay, so I can at this point, like I said, just set them all to none, and I can even do the other one here as well. So I'll just draw out another mask here. Let me redo that. And bring in this area here. Again, I'll set it to none for right now. So I can keep doing that. I might even kind of bring in this bottom part here. So let's try to do that. So then I'll just bring in this bottom part here. I'm going to temporarily go to view and turn off snap to guides, because my mask keeps snapping to that. Okay, again, set to none. Okay, so I think I'm good at this point. I'll go ahead and set these all to subtract, and these last 3 I can set to add. Okay, and I'm sort of bringing back some of the stuff that I cropped out. Now you could also rename these masks. You know, for example, I can click on this mask and rename it something else. If you wanted to go to that length, that's fine. Probably should do that, but I won't. And now at this point, I have a sort of functioning front of my truck here, and at this point I can go ahead and set to 3D. Okay. Now you won't notice any difference here, mainly because my view is set to active camera, and there's no active camera yet. But if I set this to custom view 1, and if I click on my unified camera tool, I can look around my scene here to show that this is in fact a 3D plane. Now you can always go back and get rid of areas you don't want, but I would not recommend doing this in the custom view. What I recommend in that case is just go into your front view, and then this gives us a lot more accurate results. If I want to get rid of this blue corner here, so I can bring in my mask this way and do that, and this one I will go ahead and set to subtract. Okay, so pretty much anything you want to add or subtract can be done that way. In this particular plane, make sure you set it to front view. I'm going to hit M twice, and I want to select all my masks, because I wanted to, one thing I forgot to do is set my feathering, just bring it up a little bit, so maybe a feather of 5 for right now. Just as subtle. If that's too much, I can maybe try 3. Okay, so there's my scene, and again, if I go into my custom view 1, unified camera tool, I have my front face here. Okay, so for the next part, I'm going to be as efficient as I can here. So I'm going to duplicate this pre-comp to get the other planes, including the side of this cab and the blue main load of the truck here. So what I'll do is I'm going to duplicate this front truck composition. Now if I duplicate it here in the timeline, I don't want to do that actually, because I'll create a linked duplicate. So instead I want to duplicate this specifically in, if I go to reveal in project, in the library window. But if I do that here, even though they won't be linked anymore, I still will only get one composition deep, but there's actually two compositions inside embedded. So I really need to go two comps deep. The easiest way I found to do that is using a plugin script that I found on, I think it's aescripts.com, called, if I go into File, Scripts, True Comp Duplicator. Okay, so what this is going to do is it will allow me not only to make a copy of the composition in my library and thereby making a no link comp, it's also going to allow me to do a depth limit of 2, which means it will duplicate not only the front truck here, but also the front truck embedded inside. Okay, so I want to do that every time I make a new comp for the side of the truck and the other parts. So what I'll do is I'll just use these settings. I'm going to put copy at the end of this, make sure that my depth limit is 2, copies 1, and I'll go ahead and hit duplicate selected. Hit OK. So what happens is that now I have a copy of my front truck main. So I'll rename this immediately, and I'll call this something more descriptive like side truck with tires. Okay, so I'll just hit OK, and I'll go ahead and duplicate here, Command D, just so that the placement is the same, and then I'll replace this duplicate with side truck with tires. Hold down the Option button, drag directly on top of this, and there we go. So right now they're identical, but if I drag this over, you'll see that it's a copy. So what I'm simply going to do is delete a bunch of these masks, and before I do that, I'll rotate this on the Y rotation -90, because this will be side view. I'll grab all my masks, hit delete, and start over here. And then I'll go inside this pre-comp. Again, go inside this one, and here I'm going to hit Command K and increase my width enough so I can capture basically the side of this truck and these tires. So perhaps something like that. Okay. To be more efficient, I can also grab my region of interest tool and again just make a window around the part that I want to keep, thereby making it less of an issue in terms of capturing needless space. And I'll go ahead and go to Composition, Crop, Comp to Region of Interest. Great. And then I'll go back into this one, and here I can do my corner pin and kind of get rid of the perspective. So that's what I'll do next. Let's bring in some guides, and let's go ahead and lay them out maybe like this. And this is just for starting purposes. I might need to change these guides. So I'll stretch out the truck first, like so. And here I'm kind of looking, I know that these tires are circular, and the tire wells are also more or less a half circle. So what I'm looking for is to stretch this thing far enough so that I get almost a perfect half circle here. So maybe something like that perhaps. Okay. And I'll keep checking that even when I do the corner pin. So now I'll go grab my corner pin, bring it here, and I'll go ahead. I know this says front truck copy, but keep in mind we're inside the side truck with tires. And this is just how the naming convention was naming these things based on that script. So ignore that this is actually, the name of this is front truck copy. So here I'll go ahead and start using my corner pin to de-perspective-ize my side of the truck here. So you can see the tires are aligned better here. And I'll move this one up like this, drag up a guide to help me keep things lined up. Okay, and then one down again. Somehow I have two of these. Let me delete this one. Okay, so let's do that here. Okay, and I think I originally had 2 of these because of the duplicate. That makes sense. So let's go ahead and keep resizing this. And it looks like I have this more or less straightened out. I'll just make sure. And again, here I might need to even further increase my composition width to have a better amount of space for the stretching here. So maybe even something like that, perhaps. I'll use this guide as well to help me with corners like this, because here obviously it needs to be straightened out, so I'll move it kind of like this. Again, increase the width. So I'll keep doing these sort of things until I get a pretty decent unperspective version of this side here. So maybe I'll bring this down a little bit. And again, I'm keeping an eye on this. I should probably keep an eye on this part here as well. So maybe I'll move this one to line that up. Looks like my tires are more or less lined up. Maybe more like that. So I can get pretty far in terms of getting rid of the perspective just by dragging these things with corner pin. And here's my guide here. So I think I'm pretty good here. Again, if I need to, I can keep stretching this. That should do it, I think. Let's do another width correction. Okay, looks pretty good. Now, once I've done this, I can go back into my main composition. Here is the side truck with the tires. And here I'll, among other things, is I'll start applying masks. So let me see where we are here. I'll just move this kind of along this way. And if I go into my right view, and I use my unified camera tool, I can zoom out of this view and get a pretty decent alignment here of my truck, so I can start adding my masks. So speaking of masks, I'm basically going to take out everything except for the side of the truck and the tires. So I'll get rid of the blue part of the truck here and some of the front facing plane there to match with my front truck. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to grab a mask and I'll start masking out some things. So I'll do that first. Subtract. Okay, so then I'll add another mask here. And this time I will grab everything except for the tires here. Okay, maybe something like that, and push this to the side here. Then I'll hit subtract as well. Okay, and then I'll come in here and get more specific masks. So for example, I can grab my rectangle mask and just get rid of this top part there. And then I can do a pen tool mask to get rid of this section. Subtract. Alright, one final thing we need to take care of is the road and this other part here. So this one should be fairly simple. I'll just drag this out. And then the road, I'll go ahead and make another mask. This time what I want to do though is I kind of want to keep all my tires there. So I'll just do a kind of a curved path along the bottom of this, which will probably need to be adjusted later on, but at least right now we'll have a starting point. What I'm trying to do is fit the curvature of these tires, and there we go. Then I'll close this off. Actually, I'll come in here and then close it off this way. Set to subtract. Okay, so there we have it. Now I know these tires are still in perspective, but we'll add custom tires in them later anyway, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. Let's go into custom view 1, and we can sort of now start rebuilding our truck here. So I'll grab the side here, move it towards the front. Kind of need to orbit around, see what's going on here, and then I'll use that to my advantage by pushing this against here and here. And what I'm looking for here specifically is the seam here between the two views, the two angles. So if you look at the original image of the truck, see it has a kind of a seam there, and this window lines up here, this section lines up here, and this bottom lines up there. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do as well. Move this and resize if I need, or rescale, so that those things line up. So if you can see here, the windows line up. This more or less lines up. I might even do a little bit of scaling. Or actually, I probably don't need to do that. Probably just move this back. And I can go into my front view. Make sure that gap is not there. Go into the custom view 1. These line up. And I can also, if I want, get rid of this part here later on. But for the most part, this seems to line up fairly well. Okay, so that part is good to go. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is add this sort of a midsection there that kind of is a frame for the truck area, what the cab is, and then obviously we need to add the blue load here in the back. All done basically the same way. Okay, if I need to do any more strategic editing here, I can always go into my, let's say, right view, and for example, I might need to change this red mask here so that it comes down a little more. So I can do that, for example, and then go into my custom view 1. Okay, so just made this a little more line up. Okay, so now we've got the two planes, and we'll do basically 4 planes. One again is for this middle frame, and then the blue part for the load here. Okay, so what I'll do is now I'll go ahead and duplicate this one again. So if I go to Reveal in Project, here it is. I'll run my script again. Same settings, hit duplicate, okay. And I will rename this one something like frame 4 cab, let's say. Okay. Here I'll duplicate again in my timeline and replace. Okay, so now I got yet another version of this. Same thing as before, I'll delete all the masks and go into this pre-comp called frame for cab. Again, ignore the naming of this. And here I'll go into this again, and this time I'll focus just on this frame here. So again, I'll need to size my composition first, and then I can grab my region of interest tool, grab what I'm calling just a frame, which is basically this section with these rivets and bolts and all that, kind of this gray area here. Composition, crop comp to region of interest. Go out of my pre-comp. Let's go ahead and delete this corner pin. And let's just try to line up and get rid of the perspective here. So if I bring this one down, this one is going to be fairly simple because it's more or less ready to go. I just need to change a couple of these corner pins here, and if I try to line up here, let's see, just try to kind of get a little better alignment on both sides there. So that seems to be pretty good here and here. And then I'll go back into my comp, and again here I'll go into my front view. I can even solo this, go into my front view, and again with masks, get rid of what I don't need. So I'll drag out a section of this truck here like this, let's go ahead and move this more towards the center so I can see. Hit subtract and kind of get what I don't want out. So if I drag this kind of like that perhaps, then I'll do another mask for the sky here. Get rid of that. One here. Get rid of that small section. And one here to get rid of that blue. Okay, so let's go ahead and make them all subtract. And I have what I call basically this little middle frame area. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring everything back. I'll go to my custom view and I'll just push this section right where I think it should be, which is kind of in the back like this. Let's go to the front view. Let's just push this here. Custom view. Let's go actually to the right view. And I'll push this here. Custom view again. So maybe like that. Now I know there's a gap here, but again, if we rotate this kind of from where we're going to place our camera, it really doesn't stand out too much. If it does, I can always find a way to cover that up. So I can even bring this a little forward and against this main truck area. So perhaps something like that. Okay, so the last thing I'll do is I'll add the main blue. If you look at the original image here, this blue, what I'm assuming it's called the payload of this thing. So I'll just refer to this as the blue payload here. And easiest way to do that probably is to duplicate the side truck with tires. So I'll find that in my source, which is this guy right here. Let's go into File, Scripts, True Comp Duplicator. Same thing, duplicate, hit OK, X out. Again, we'll rename this blue payload, let's say. Okay, again, I'll duplicate here, replace, get rid of all the masks. And this one, since I'm duplicating the one that was already the side, should be pretty straightforward. So here, basically, all I really need to do is just reset my masks to keep everything but, or rather to take out everything but the blue payload here. So I'll go to the right side, and you can probably guess what I'm going to do. I'm going to do some more masking work. I'll get rid of here, subtract. I'll get rid of here. And don't need this side either. And don't need the tires. So I'll just take out everything but basically the blue section here. Okay. And if I do a solo, this is what we get. So now I'll go ahead and go to my custom view 1 again. And I'm going to try to line up this blue so that basically, again, if I refer to the original image, this blue should be basically the height of this middle frame section. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So if I go to the front view first, let's try to move this here. Maybe better to do this in the right view. So let's line it up here. Kind of like that, perhaps. Let's go to custom view. Keep in mind that custom view is sort of After Effects' perspective view. You can almost call it that. Now, this blue payload here is a little bit larger than it needs to be in terms of height. So I'll basically kind of scale it down where it needs to be. Maybe like this. And I'm doing this in the custom view here because it's easier to see, at least for me it is, where I need to scale this down. So perhaps something like this. Okay, so for the most part, we have recreated our truck. Again, I'll tweak this a little bit to get rid of some gaps that don't belong there. Here, and I'll move this blue out here. Kind of like that. I'm basically always orbiting around just to make sure that everything kind of lines up where it needs to be. I'll realign this frame here so it's more against the back of the truck, kind of like that. Alright, so for the most part, we're good to go. Now, things like this gap here, I can always bring that back. So that's part of my side view of the truck here. So I want to make sure I'm doing this in the right view. So I can come in here and kind of bring this back a little bit so that gap isn't there. Then I'll go into the custom view one, and for the most part, that seems to be a bit better. So there we go. We've got most of this truck. We got some areas here that I might want to tweak with masks, like these bottom white areas and this part right here. But for the most part, we've got our truck, recreated. Okay, so we can also fix this little part that's sticking out here. Again, that's just going to be a very simple right view, and I can come in here and take a look at this part. So here, what I could simply do, since this is the side, is I can just add a little bit of a mask here that kind of rounds this corner. So perhaps something like this. And again, set that to subtract. Okay, so then if I look at it from the custom view again, hopefully that is not as noticeable as it was before. By the way, if I want to turn off the masks at any point, if I just want to focus on the scaling tool, I can just click on this toggle mask tool here, and it can come in here and sort of bring this down a little bit. Okay, so perhaps something like that. Turn masks back on. Okay, the final thing I'll do is I'll just get rid of this one extra part here that's kind of bothering me. So I'll go into my right view again. And let's take a look at that part that's sticking out there at the end. I think it's right there, and that's just going to be very simple mask extension so that it goes past that point. Okay, so we have, I think, successfully recreated a good portion of this truck, and we are ready to move on with creating the road. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we will add, if we look at the original video here, we'll add these moving elements, the road, grass, terrain, and the sky. So these are all done with stock still images, and the key to all this is going to be an expression called offset. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing we'll do is we'll grab this road here. Now this is something that I found on a stock photo site and kind of photoshopped a little bit to make it a little bit more dirty, but basically this is what I'll be using. So it's a repeating pattern here, and I made sure that this part repeats with this part. So what I'll do immediately is I will grab this and put it on the bottom. Now I want to make it 3D so I can actually see this thing. By default, the orientation is wrong, so let's go ahead and change that. So R for rotation. First thing I will do is a -90 on the X. And then let's bring this down. And then I'll do Z rotation to also 90 or -90, doesn't really matter. Okay, so if we rotate our camera around here, our virtual camera, we get sort of a nice placement here. So I'm going to actually push this road back a little bit so that there's more of the road in the back than the front. So I'll push this way and rotate. Now so far, we've got a decent amount of road. What I'm going to do is also stretch it out a bit, so give us some more road. Perhaps like that. Then I'll move this back even more. Okay, so let's try that. And again, if we look at the side view of this, we want to make sure that the truck is obviously sitting on the road. So let's take a look at the right. And for the most part, it seems like it is. If it's not, we can always change that. Okay, so the key again to all of this is going to be offset expression with an offset effect. Okay, so this is what we're going to do here. I'm going to pre-compose the road. We'll change this to the top option, so we'll call this road. And I'm going to go ahead and double click in there, and you'll see that it's basically one composition that stretches the entire road. Okay. Next thing I'll do is I'm going to add an effect to this called offset. And I'll apply it to the road. So what offset does is it basically, well, it offsets an image. So if I click on the Shift Center 2 and drag it on the x-axis, you'll see that it creates a repeating pattern. So I'm going to undo that. Let's go to frame 0. We'll click on Shift Center 2. And let's just maybe go to the 3-second mark. And let's move this to arbitrary value, which will change. Okay. So if I hit play, the road starts to move. So I'm going to go to half resolution so you can see this more in real time. Okay, so it starts to sort of move and offset and loop. So here are my keyframes, for example. Now at some point it will stop, and also it's probably going way too slow for the rate of speed that the truck is going to be moving. So I will in fact go to the second keyframe, and let's go ahead and increase that to maybe something crazy like 10,000. Okay, now if we play it back, we get a much faster movement. So now I'm going to option click on the stopwatch and type in an expression. We're going to do a loop out expression, and we're going to make the type equals quote offset as well. So we've got sort of two offsets going on here. So the second offset, which is the expression, will make this continuously loop even past the keyframe. So even if this goes past here, it will go on. Probably need to make this a little bit faster, so I'll push these keyframes closer in. And let's take another look. Alright, looks good. Now let's go back into our scene, and I'm going to set this to half resolution just to get better playback. Okay, going backwards. So let's make that adjustment. So instead of going from this value, which is on the X, I'm going to change this to minus 10,000. So hopefully this will go the other way. There we go. And if I play this back in real time, it kind of starts doing that. So I think I'm getting pretty decent speed here. I could even try this with full playback, just to see how this looks in full resolution. Okay, that may be a little fast. So let's try minus 5,000. And we'll switch this to half resolution. Alright, so that seems to be a little bit more accurate, I guess. A couple things I'll do also is I want to make the road wider. So let's do that. Let's widen this thing up. Probably should move the truck. Now, I'm going to make a new null object. And I'll make it 3D. And this is simply going to be a parent to all of the truck elements. So that if I move one of them, let's call this null truck move. So then now if I move this thing, it'll move the whole truck. Kind of like that. So I'm trying to find a way to make this thing fit more into my scene here, so that it looks like it's small enough to fit in a lane of this highway. Alright, so let's go in a little bit. Okay, so far so good. We've got a couple of issues though with the road. You know, we've got this dark part of the tires. It looks like it doesn't belong in this kind of bright-ish highway. And we'll deal with this in a minute. Primarily, we're going to get rid of some of this with a shadow of this truck being cast. If you look at the original here, I put a nice sort of a overall shadow underneath the truck itself. Okay, but right now we're getting a pretty decent result here. Okay, and at this point I want to go ahead and make a camera. So let's go to New, Camera. I'm going to set sort of a wide-ish angle of 35mm. Two-node camera is very important here. For right now, I'm going to disable all the depth of field stuff and hit OK. So if I go into my camera view, I can go ahead and click on my unified camera tool and again try to get a decent shot here. Let's change this to full resolution. So the unified camera tool is really going to help us out here because it's going to allow us to sort of move the camera around, including its point of interest, and not have to deal with it separately. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the road and kind of move it forward a little bit because I do want to plant my truck right around here. Alright, so let's take a look at this. Okay, now I could also keep moving the road back if I want to get more of a perspective shot. So I can keep pushing this pretty much as far as I want, but I do want to be careful so that my lanes don't get too distorted. So maybe somewhere back there. So I think this is a pretty good balance here. Do another preview. Okay, now at some point I do want to add some motion blur, and if I just add motion blur right now, it's not going to do anything to this road, primarily because it's pre-comp and the actual motion happens in the pre-comp. I could go inside my pre-comp and try to turn on there. However, from my experience, I just like doing this through an adjustment layer. So if I do an adjustment layer, I can turn on force motion blur for the adjustment layer, and that should pass on some of the motion blur, as you can see here. Now this is going to be a little bit more processing. It's going to involve a little bit more processing, but it does add more to the value here, realism. So let's make this 4, for example. So if I play this back, I'm getting motion blur on the things that are basically moving at the expense of processing time. Okay, so even if I go to half resolution, it would be decent. Alright, so now let's go ahead and start adding some more elements here. So the next thing I'll do is I'm going to go into my stock photos, and I will add a sky in the background. So let me try to find that. Here it is right here. I should really put this in here. And the grass as well. So here is my sky here. Probably should rename this as sky. And I'll put this all the way on the bottom. Now again, I need to make this into a 3D element. And let's push this back on the Z-axis. So hold down Shift. When you do so, it's a much faster move. Now I do want to put this way back, even behind the road basically. So the way to really do this, I should be able to do this in the right view. And if I zoom out using my unified camera tool, I can see where exactly I need to put the sky. So let's go all the way behind the road here. Now what this is going to do is it's definitely going to make the sky a lot smaller. Okay, so we need to compensate for that by turning up our scale, and then we can also move this to sort of better be aligned, and maybe we can also move this up, mainly because, you know, eventually this part of the road will be covered up with the terrain, and we can move the sky almost right to where the horizon is of the road. Okay, so now we've got that section of it. So far we've got a moving road and a still sky, basically laying this out here. So let's go to the camera view here. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to reuse this road compositions, especially with its offset parameters. So I can, for example, click on the road composition, reveal it in the project, and let's just go ahead and keep moving this into our tutorial folder so everything is visible. And this time I don't really need to do the script here. I can simply just do a Command D, and that is because I don't have anything else. There's not another pre-comp in here. So I'll just duplicate here, Command D, and this one I will call grass. And to keep things nice and organized, I'll again duplicate it here as well and replace. So what's happening here is basically I have another element that's identical to the road, and I'm going to use this, but I'm going to replace the road with grass. So I will click on the grass. Here's my road. So what I'm simply going to do here is I'm going to replace this road image with grass. Before I do that, I'm going to pre-compose this. Okay, and I can just simply, again, keep the top option on, and let's call this grass. And the reason why I'm doing this is because now I can go into the grass and load in my grass, replace the road here. And in this particular situation, all I have to do to get rid of these white lines, because they're just this border, is I'll stretch this out, something like that. Now I can even kind of collapse this a little bit on the scale, and now I have, now this isn't technically perfectly loopable like the road is, but it's random enough that it wouldn't be a problem. So if I do go to the grass layer, the offset is still on. It's going to basically move this, but it's random enough where the seams are not visible. So it's right here. And this one I will put underneath the road and kind of shrink it on the x-axis here and move it here. So now I have a smaller loopable area here that acts like a shoulder to the road here. And I'll just keep making this a little bit smaller on the width. So now I have something like this. Again, this is just another element here on the shoulder that is moving as the truck is sort of traveling down here. Okay, so I'll do that same thing to the other side. I'll duplicate my grass layer and I'll put it to the other side here. And let's just go to my custom view, because I want to take a look around. And here, you know, I could kind of even things up. Maybe I'll make this not as wide here, or I'll probably just move it kind of like that, just to match this side. So we're, as you see, we're slowly building up our scene here. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is I'm going to add some terrain here and here next to the grass areas, and I will find this comp in the project folder. So what I'll do is I'm going to duplicate this just like I did before, because I need more than one layer of compositing depth. So I'll go into Scripts, True Comp, Duplicator, and I'll pretty much keep everything the same here, and I will just basically duplicate, select it. Okay, good. And then I will immediately change this grass copy into, we'll just call it terrain. Alright, and then just as before, I'll duplicate this grass in the timeline, immediately replace it with terrain, and move this over here. Okay, so if I go to my custom view here, take a look around, here, two identical comps. So the terrain one, obviously, I'll replace with actual terrain. So let's go into here. Don't worry about this being called grass copy. Just know that it's going to be replaced. And specifically, Adobe stock, whatever this is going to be replaced with this Adobe stock. So I'm just going to hold down the Option key as I replace this. Now it looks like I need to sort of stretch this out to fill in some of these gaps, or I can crop to composition, either way. So I can do something like this maybe, and so that I'm not stretching this too much, I'll go ahead and go into my region of interest and crop this to here, composition, crop comp to region of interest. And then I'll go back here and I could do the sort of the same thing here. Maybe this time I'll do Command K and just bring my width down a bit so that it fills in the entire composition on the height and the width. Okay, so something like that. So what this is going to do is immediately it's going to create, if I show you this a little bit more close up here, it's going to make this sort of a longish plane, but I'll go ahead and stretch this out both directions. Try to match the length of the grass here, like so. I'll even move this terrain below the grass layer. So if I take a look at this from, let's say, the camera view, so you can see it. Basically, the terrain, the grass, and the road are all moving about the same speed here, specifically with the offset. One thing I will want to make sure, though, is that there's enough terrain here, so I'll go ahead and stretch this out even more. Okay, and let's take a look at it from camera view. Also change my camera slightly. Maybe I'll even go in a little bit. Okay, so basically I can sort of try to use my camera to get rid of some of these gaps. And I am getting some other gaps here with the sky and all that, so I can make that always larger. And bring it up if I need to. I'll go ahead and duplicate this terrain to the other side. So if I go into my custom view 1 again, grab the terrain, maybe I'll make this even longer here. Duplicate it and bring it to the other side here. Okay, so let's take a look at this again from the camera. So sometimes what happens is that the adjustment layer needs to be also adjusted. So I can make this a little bit larger. I'm not sure how that actually happened, but both of these should be 100. And I think also probably need to reset my adjustment layer. You can sort of see that for the most part we've got all three road, grass, and the terrains kind of moving the same speed here. Okay, so now let's work on making the actual truck a little bit more realistic here. This truck seems to be floating basically on this road here. So what I'll do is I'll add a little bit of a drop shadow here to hide some of these uneven places. If you look at the original here, you can sort of see that covers it pretty well. Easiest thing for me to do basically is just to make a new solid, and I'll make it the composition black. And I'll immediately make this 3D. We need to rotate here, so I will rotate this 90 degrees on the X, and let's do that right now. So let's do 90 degrees on the X. And then I'll also rotate 90 degrees on the Z. That way basically I have my plane correctly lined up with my truck here, so it kind of all looks like this. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the right side view, and I want to make sure that the black solid is just underneath the tires, but just above the actual road here. And while I'm here, I'll move this on the Z-axis so that, let me zoom out here, it's also centered on the truck. That will give me less things to fight with here. And let's just move this almost directly in the center of the truck here. Great. Now let's go to the custom view 1 and zoom in on this. I'll recenter my scene as well. I'm using the unified camera tool for all this. And I will move this below. I'll move this underneath the truck here. So if I orbit this around, you can sort of see what I'm dealing with here. It's a little bit too long, so let me just, or too wide rather. So I'll just make it like so. Okay, as I'm tweaking stuff, obviously I can make this longer. Alright, so here basically is my very hard edge drop shadow here that needs to be softened up. So what I've found is the easiest trick for me to soften these shadows that I'm making with the solid layer is to use masks. So what I'll do is I'll double click on this black solid and go into mask mode so I can see both of them at the same time. In this view, I'll just readjust it so I'm looking at more or less the whole drop shadow. And here I'm going to go into my black solid, and if I double click, I make a mask that is the exact size of the actual solid here. So what I'll do here is I will set this original mask to subtract, and then I will duplicate it and set this one to add. So right now it kind of goes back to where it started. But if I go into mask expansion, I can bring this in and feather the edges like so. Okay, so what happens if you look closely here, you start getting some feathering. Now the overall mask will be smaller, so that's not a big deal. I can always click on the solid here and expand it out. Careful not to click on the masks. As a matter of fact, I might even just turn that off. So I'm clicking on the actual scale controls. So maybe something like that. Okay, you can see there's a nice feathering going on there. And if I rotate around, I can also give myself more width to this as I push this along. Let me go ahead and close my layer mode. I can look at this from the other side. Now I got a pretty good shadow going here. If I need to do any kind of editing to it, that's pretty simple. I can move pretty much any direction I want and just rescale as needed. I can even give myself a little bit of transparency as well. So what this does is it hides a lot of these imperfections. It also shows me some of these white areas on the tires here that I might need to get rid of, and I'll do that relatively soon. Okay, so here's my drop shadow. The magic is spoiled if I look at it from the other side, but from this point of view it seems to be okay. So the next step is some things I need to clean up. One is this rear view mirror is still part of this window here, and that should not be there. As I said earlier, I need to get rid of some of these white areas. And overall, I just try to go around and see what else I can fix. So let's deal with this actual tires first. So if I go into my right view, and if I zoom in, I can sort of see what the problem is. See these little white areas? So if I go into my side view, tires, turn on my masks, I can go in here and just reshape my mask. So let's see, here's a mask here, and let's go inside here and just kind of get rid of some of these white areas. Now I can also temporarily, as I said before, toggle my mask on and off just to see that, and move some of these around. I'm not worried too much about this because again, this will be mostly lost in the drop shadow. But just a little bit of touch up here. Maybe I'll even mask feather this a little bit. Unified camera tool. And then I'll fix these as well. Just get rid of this as well. Okay, so if I go back into my custom view 1, you can definitely see that this is a little better cleanup here. So if I rotate this around, it should be a lot better. There's still a little bit some at the front tire here. So let's go back, and while we're doing this, get rid of that. Okay, let's turn on mask. See what the problem is. And let's just move this up. Maybe like that. And maybe move this up as well. Okay, I think I'm good with this. Again, that drop shadow really helps hide a lot of these imperfections here that we got from trimming this. I could also, just because I'm here, go into here. Let's rename this drop shadow. Turn off the mask, and if I need to, scale it, push it back so there's more towards the back here. You can do that as well. Okay, so now I have to go to all the terrain and grass and the road layers, and I'll just push them all forward to give me more room here so I don't see any gaps. Looking at the original example, looks like I may have made the road a little bit too narrow, so that's not a big deal. Just go to the road and we'll stretch it out, kind of like so. Now obviously with that we've got to move some things for the grass and the terrain on the right side here, and then the same thing on the left side. Move these guys. Okay, so that gives me a little bit more room here for my lanes. I could even also make the truck a little bit smaller here. So let's add also to the truck move the drop shadow. And then if I scale this down, I'll make the truck smaller. But if I do that again, you might want to check on the right side, make sure that you are not hovering too much off the road here. So let's move that right around there. Let's go back into custom view 1. Alright, so this may be a good starting point here. Let's go to the camera view. So let's do a 10-second camera move. I'll click on my camera here. I will lock the position, and let's go to the 10-second mark. And let's do, for example, a rotate and a push in maybe. Then we'll just move the truck more center as well. Okay, so this is what it looks like with a quick preview. Now, to me, this seems to be moving a little bit too perfect, so I'm going to add a wiggle expression on the position of my camera here. So I'll option click on the stopwatch. I'll add a very subtle wiggle expression, maybe something like 2, 20. Now if I play this back, it should give me a little more randomness. And while I'm here, it looks like I need to also do something about these gaps in the sky. So I'll grab the sky here, and I'll just stretch it on the y-axis a little bit. And that should pretty much do the trick. Maybe move this up as well. Okay, so this is the half-res preview of about 10 seconds of the actual camera move here. I've added some I've added a wiggle expression to the position here, and just to give it a little bit less robotic camera move, so it kind of feels a little more human. And a couple of things we need to address. One is the tires are not moving, so we'll do that next. I grabbed a tire from the same stock photo site, so if I bring it in, so this is just a vector tire, and I will immediately pre-compose it. And we'll keep the top option, and let's just call this, well, just call it tire. And let's go ahead and get in there. The one big problem here, though, is if you look at the guides, so for example, if I set this to be exactly 360 by 360, and if I set this to be 180 on the Y center point and 180 on the Z center point, it looks like the tire is sort of a little bit off. See how it's it should be dead center basically, but it's not. So the easiest trick for this is just the anchor points. If I hit A for anchor point, hold down the command button as you do this, you can sort of try to get in there and align it as perfectly centered as you can. The more perfectly centered, the better result you'll have. So maybe like so. Okay, then at this point I'll just do a very fast tire rotation. So I'll hit R for rotation, and I'll mark a keyframe there, maybe 3 seconds in, and I'll do something like -20 revolutions. So if I play this back, we get a pretty fast tire rotation. Okay, so on the rotation, let's go ahead and put an expression. Loop out, type equals quote continue. That way it will continuously keep looping all the way through. Okay, now if you look at the actual video here, you know, what I kind of did here is I made the top diagonal of this a little darker, just because if you had the light hitting this side, you know, the top part might be a little bit darker. So what I can do is grab a new adjustment layer, effect, color correction curves, and let's just bring down the overall value here like so. Now, a good thing about adjustment layers is you can always put a mask on them. So let's just do a mask like so. We'll even feather this. Mask feather. And let's actually reverse this. Let's put this corner down here and this one up. There we go. So maybe something like that. We'll throw in some motion blur on the wheel. And I think we're ready to put this thing into use. So in our scene, I'll go ahead and make this 3D. Let's rotate on the y-axis. So let's do -90. And what I'm going to try to do here basically is align this with the regular wheel and only really get the part that's spinning attached to the wheel here. So let me explain this. Let me switch this to full resolution so I can see a bit better here. And I'll go into my right view and let's push this against this wheel. So I'll just bring it in here, obviously scale it down, push it up a little bit. Now I do want to keep a little bit of this tire here, you know, so what I could do is put a mask that sort of basically trims out the edges of this fake tire and reveals a little bit of the inside. But before I do that, let me see if I really even need to do that. So let's go to Custom View 1. Let's go ahead and push in here. And I'll push this against the existing tire. Something like that. Let's go to Camera 1. Let's do another render. And maybe what I'll do here is I'll go into my right view again, and just as I was saying before, I can do a perfect circle if I double click on this path right here, and I'll bring this in. So if I hold down Shift and Command, I can bring this in and reveal some of the original. I don't want to make this too small because it starts revealing this metallic part here. So let me go in a little bit. Let's feather this, like a 5 perhaps. Actually feather, let's do like a 15. And I might even need to bring this out more. So Shift and Command again. There we go. Let's take a look at the camera 1. So again, the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to leave a little bit of the original tire there. Now I could also, since this little metallic part is peeking out, I could go also to the side view here. Right. Let's go into side truck, solo that, and I can sort of paint this out. So if I go to full resolution, I can paint this out. So the easiest way to do this is basically to switch to your clone stamp tool. Then if you double click this, you'll get into basically paint mode. So if I make my brush a little bit larger, go into my stamp tool mode, and maybe I'll grab some of these. Let's make this 15 pixels. Grab some of these colors that are nearby and just get rid of this part. Let me make the hardness not as much. So just get rid of some of these metallic parts of the rim here. Maybe something like this. Now I can go back into my scene here, unsolo this, and have this not show up as much, especially if I go into my camera 1. The perspective will definitely help us here. So if I go back into half resolution, and now I don't. Oh, one thing about this is you do want to make sure that when you're painting on anything, you do want to make sure that the paint is all the way through. So this should be set to constant. Okay. So for example, here at the beginning, I might need to go back, take all my clone things here and push it back so that it's visible at frame 0. Okay, so now if I go into my view here, I should for the most part only see fake tire here. And one thing I'll do on the fake tire is I want to increase the darker part of this. So what I'll do is go to my adjustment layer, and let's just bring down the top value here. Great. So here's my scene again with that same tire. And again, I'm just using a little bit of the old tire with the new tire just to make it blend in a little more. Now I could also put the same tire in all of these. I think that's what I did on that original clip that I showed you at the beginning of the finished scene. So that's just a matter of, again, going into the right view. Let's zoom out and move over, so I can see all these tires. And let's do the same thing. Let's grab the tire, Command D. We'll just move it. Again, a lot of this will be helped by the perspective, since these tires won't be as seen as they are from this view. So even though here they may look a little bit fake, when I switch to the perspective, it's going to help us out. So there we go. Go back into the camera view, and now if I hit play, all those tires are moving, and they're not as noticeable obviously because again it's in a perspective, but just a subtle hint of movement there really helps. Now we can also go in here and paint out, technically if you look at the custom view, you can see that that rear view mirror is still being kind of stretched along this, but from our camera view that's not really even relevant, so I don't really need to go out there and paint that out, although I could do that the same way I did the tires. Okay, so the final thing I'll do is I can just overall do a couple of adjustments to this. So for example, we can make a new adjustment layer, add a little bit of vignette, so I can put a color correction on this. Let's go into curves. I'm going to bring this down. And then adjustment layers take masks, so I can reverse this to give us a little bit of a vignette, perhaps, just to focus on that scene a little more. I can also add an adjustment layer as well. This one I can put curves on as well, and here I can stylistically, push values toward more of a greenish tint or whatever you want. So if I can go to my red channel, I can bring it down. That'll push it more towards the green. You can even go to the blue channel, push that up a little bit. Kind of stylize this to your final scene. Now keep in mind that this is all done with half resolution, so the final one I'll show you with the full resolution. And what I'll do also is I'll take this adjustment layer which has the motion blur, and I'll throw that underneath the other two adjustment layers. Crank this up to maybe 8 blurs per sample to get a better motion blur. And let's do final proof render here. Okay, so this is the final render piece here in full resolution, everything moving and offsetting. And that's it. That wraps it up for another episode of Revenge MoGraph. See you guys next time. Like, subscribe, and do all that. And I'll do more. Thank you.